Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, let's look at requesting a reasonable accommodation. Now, one of the big controversies over the last several years of the ADA is what exactly does an employee have to say to request a reasonable accommodation? And if you look at your materials, the ADA is very clear. An individual must request an accommodation. So unlike the FMLA, where an employer is supposed to be, quote, reasonably aware, under the ADA, the employee actually has to request the accommodation. And the EEOC has been very clear. They have said it is the responsibility of the individual with a disability to inform the employer that an accommodation is needed. So this begs the issue. What exactly does an employee have to say? Because I'll tell you, if an employee says the right things and requests an accommodation, and the employer doesn't pick up on that, well, then the interactive process never takes place. And we never start to look at what we can do to help the employee. What can we do? The medical certification form never gets sent. Nothing goes into motion, and the employer is going to be in trouble. Well, if you look at your materials, in the past, the EEOC has stated that if an employee requests time off for a reason related or possibly related to a disability, then the employer should consider that to be a request for a reasonable accommodation under the ADA. Well, that's a lot for an employee to ask for. I mean, really, how does an employee know, hey, I've got to ask for time off related to my disability, or I have to mention my disability? So employers used to successfully plead, well, he never requested a reasonable accommodation, he never told us he had a disability, all kinds of things where employees with disabilities would basically lose their rights because they didn't say the right things. Well, if you look at your materials here, more recently, the EEOC has come out and they've stated that when an employee tells the employer, one, that there's an adjustment or a change that they need at work, and two, because of a medical, which includes mental, conditions. That is all that is required. So think how low the standard is. An employee comes in and says, look, I need some help. I need a change. That's one. Because my hands hurt. Well, that's a medical condition. Because I get dizzy. Because I get fatigued. Because I pass out. Because I throw up. Who knows? Whenever somebody is adjusting or makes a request for an adjustment or a change at work, that counts. And is it related to a medical condition, which includes mental? Now, so let's look at a few examples here. Here in Matilda, you've got an employee, and the court said she triggered the interactive process by requesting that she get a new supervisor because of her mental illness. Okay, now one, that is not a reasonable accommodation. All right, that is not something that an employer is necessarily going to have to do. That, hey, I need a new supervisor. Oh, okay, we'll get you a new supervisor because you got depression. No, but look what the employee is doing. The employee says, look, I need a change because of my mental condition. That's it. That triggers the interactive process. And just because the accommodation was not reasonable, that doesn't mean you don't have to look at it. You don't have to engage in the interactive process. You do. And remember, how do you engage in the interactive process? You get the medical limitations from the doctor. That's your medical certification, or the healthcare provider, I should say. And then you sit down and say, okay, here's the limitations. What can we do to help? The magic words. What can we do to help? In Angus, another example. Here you've got an employee that basically triggered the interactive process because she told her supervisor they're requiring her to continuously print placards. That was causing her hands to ache. Well, look at this. Whether or not that's a reasonable accommodation, we don't know, but hey, asking me to continuously to print these placards, that causes my hands to ache. Well, that's asking for an adjustment or change in the job due to a medical condition. That counts. Now here in our next case in Lynch, we've got, and this is a real interesting request for accommodation. This woman told her employer that because of her mobility issues, during a fire, she's going to have to use the elevator. Well, I don't think you can do that. All right, so they're going through these fire drills. Hey, I have mobility issues. I need to use the elevator. Well, that is going to trigger the reasonable accommodation request. That's going to trigger it. Why? Well, I'm asking for an adjustment or change. That's one, take the elevator. And two, I have a medical condition. That counts. In another case here, Donahoe, we've got an employee where the EEOC said this triggered the reasonable accommodation request because the employee asked for leave because of her neck and back condition. Well, there you go. I'm asking for a change due to a medical condition. That counts. In another case here, you've got an employee that told her area director that she needs a different computer monitor because the monitor she had then was hurting her eyes and causing headaches. Boom, there you are. I need a new computer. That's an adjustment or change due to the fact that it hurts my eyes, causes me headaches. That's a medical condition, or could be. You see, this standard for determining, okay, what is it that I have to do to say I need a reasonable accommodation? What does the employee have to say? That is not a high standard. And that's, understand, anybody that's been staying up with the ADA since 2011, you have seen the requirements for employees drop and drop and drop and drop, as you'll obviously see in this course. But I'll tell you, are you asking for an adjustment or a change, and is it due to a medical condition? Any employee that says that, your supervisors have to see that as a trigger for the ADA and let someone like Human Resources know. Well, I think we pretty well exhausted what is a request for a reasonable accommodation. So let's look at the flip side and look at what is not a request for a reasonable accommodation. And we've got a case here called Murray. And in this case, the employee claimed that the employer already knew about my limitations. They know I've got this condition. And so the employer talked to the employee. The employer said, okay, got these limitations. What can we do to help you? And the employee told the employer, it's okay. I got it. I'm going to self-monitor as to whether or not I'm going to run into any type of issues. And I'll let you know. Okay. Well, the employer did a good job. They asked. That's the interactive process. The employee said, hey, I got it. And the employee never spoke up and said, hey, I need additional help now. I'm not able to self-monitor. So the employee dropped the ball. The employer won. And really, it's because the employer did a good job. I know about this condition. I'm on top of it, so we're going to talk about it. You told me you got it. The employee dropped the ball. The employer did a good job. That was not a request for accommodation. In another case, Waltz, this one is just rich. Here you've got an employee that is saying, my employer should have known that I was mental. My erratic behavior was so open and obvious that the employer should have known that I had bipolar disorder. But the court came back and they said, look, it's not an employer's job to guess as to what's wrong with you. You got to say something like, oh, I'm having a lot of trouble because of my mental issues, or I'm having a lot of trouble getting this job done because I can't focus, or, I am so erratic, I can't control my behavior, and I'm going to need some help. Something. But no, just saying that the employer has to guess, that is not it. In a similar case, you got Keeler. And in Keeler, you've got a woman that admitted that nobody knew about my disability, but she said, look, they should have known that I had a disability because I took lots of notes and I was crying a lot. And I told my employer that my job was very stressful and overwhelming. And then later she'd asked for a transfer. The court came back and they said, no, that's not enough. Well, the reason being, look, she didn't link the two together. And just saying that something is stressful and overwhelming, well, that's kind of what a job is. Yeah, that's what happens. Everybody feels stressed and overwhelmed from time to time. That is not enough. It is not asking for a change in your job due to a medical condition. No, didn't link the two, not enough. In McCarroll, you got another very vague request here. We had a shuttle bus driver that told his supervisor that he was too sore to report to work. I'm too sore. Well, that's a lot of people in any given day. I'm too sore. No. You got to be more specific than that. That is too vague. All right. Something along the lines would have been acceptable where, oh my gosh, my hip is so sore, I'm going to have to take some time off. Not that I'm too sore to report today. That's too vague. In another case, Parsons, you've got an employee that told his supervisor that, well, my sleep apnea is coming back again. Okay. And he was trouble getting his insurance company to pay for his medical device. Well, okay, he mentioned a medical condition. Sleep apnea is a medical condition, but he's talking about getting his insurance company to pay for his medical device. He never tied it to needing an accommodation or having trouble on the job. You got to tie it to that. Here, he mentioned his medical condition, but he tied it to an insurance problem. The employer is not expected to guess. And here you have another case, Lanier, where basically you've got an employee who, again, never tied the request of being on an alternate on-call rotation due to their insomnia. Basically, she just complained that she was being sleep deprived. Okay, well, I'm feeling sleep deprived, or I'm getting depression, or I have insomnia. Well, you're going to have to tie that to the on-call rotation. Making the employer guess is not enough. So you see, the standard has come down, but you still have to tie your medical condition or mental condition to the reason why you're asking for a change. And I'll tell you, probably the most critical thing in recognizing that an employee is asking for a reasonable accommodation under the ADA is that no magic words are required. I still hear this to this day. Well, the person didn't say that they needed a reasonable accommodation. They didn't say that they're covered by the ADA. They don't have to do any of that. That is not the law today. What do they have to do? They have to say they've got some medical or mental condition and they need a change in work. That's it. And I've given you a couple cases here that basically come right out and tell you there's no magic words that you have to say. And finally, if you look at the EEOC versus Chevron case, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals specifically said, look, the employee just simply has to explain that they need an adjustment and it's due to a medical condition. That's it. So get that out of your supervisor's head, that they got to say ADA or they got to say I'm requesting accommodation. They don't have to say any of that.